In the frozen wilderness of Russia's Ural Mountains, on a remote slope known to the indigenous Mansi people as the Mountain of the Dead, something happened on the night of February 1, 1959, that has defied explanation for over 6 decades. 9 young hikers, experienced and well-equipped, tore open their tent from the inside and fled into the bitter cold wearing little more than their underwear. Within hours, all 9 were dead. What drove them from the relative safety of their shelter into certain death remains one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, now known as Ekaterinburg. According to university records, Dyatlov was an experienced hiker and skier who had led multiple expeditions into the Ural Mountains. The group included 8 other students and graduates, 7 men and 2 women, ranging in age from 21 to 37. They set out on January 23, 1959, with the goal of reaching Mount Otorten, a challenging but achievable winter objective for a group of their skill level. According to the diaries and photographs recovered from the campsite, the first several days of the expedition proceeded normally. The group traveled by train and truck to the starting point, then skied into the wilderness carrying heavy packs with provisions for several weeks. The mood was upbeat. They sang songs, took photographs, and even produced a humorous handwritten newspaper called the Otorten Evening News. The weather was cold but within the expected range for the region in winter. Nothing in their records suggests any tension, conflict, or fear. On January 31, the group reached the base of Kholat Syakhl, the Mountain of the Dead in the Mansi language. According to Dyatlov's final diary entry, the group had planned to cache supplies and continue to Mount Otorten the following day. Rather than descending into the tree line for better shelter, Dyatlov made the decision to pitch their tent on the exposed slope of the mountain. This decision has been debated for decades. Some believe it was a navigational error caused by poor visibility. Others believe Dyatlov wanted to practice open-slope camping techniques. When the group failed to send a telegram upon reaching Mount Otorten by their expected return date, a search was organized. According to the official investigation files, volunteer search parties set out from Sverdlovsk on February 20. On February 26, searchers discovered the group's tent on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. According to the discovery report, the tent was partially collapsed and covered in snow. What immediately alarmed the searchers was that the tent had been cut open from the inside. Long slashes in the canvas showed where the occupants had sliced their way out in apparent desperation. The scene inside the tent was deeply unsettling. According to the investigation report, the hikers' boots, outer clothing, and provisions were neatly arranged inside, indicating the group had been preparing for sleep when something caused them to flee. The tent contained food, alcohol, cameras, and equipment that the hikers would never have willingly abandoned. Footprints in the snow leading away from the tent showed that some of the hikers were barefoot, others wore only socks, and a few had a single boot or shoe. They had fled into temperatures of approximately -30 degrees Celsius. The footprints led approximately 1 mile downhill toward a tree line and a small cedar forest. According to the investigation files, the first 2 bodies were found on February 27 near the edge of the forest, beneath a large cedar tree. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivanishchenko were found in their underwear, barefoot, near the remains of a small fire. The branches of the cedar tree were broken up to approximately 15 feet, indicating someone had climbed high into the tree, possibly to look for the tent or to watch for something. Both men had died of hypothermia. 3 more bodies were found over the following days between the cedar tree and the tent, spaced at intervals along the path. According to the investigation, Igor Dyatlov was found face up in the snow approximately 300 meters from the cedar tree, his hand clutching a branch as if trying to pull himself forward. Zinaida Kalmogorova was found further up the slope, and Rustam Slobodin was found between them. All 3 appeared to have been trying to return to the tent. Slobodin had a small fracture in his skull, though the coroner determined it was not the cause of death. The remaining 4 hikers were not found until May 1959, when the spring thaw began to melt the deep snow in a ravine approximately 75 meters from the cedar tree. According to the investigation files, the bodies of Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol were discovered buried under 13 feet of snow at the bottom of the ravine. These 4 were better clothed than the others, some wearing clothing that appeared to have been removed from those who had already died. They had tried to survive. They had failed. The autopsy results for the 4 bodies found in the ravine shocked the investigators and transformed the case from a tragic accident into an enduring mystery. According to the forensic reports, Lyudmila Dubinina had sustained massive chest trauma with multiple broken ribs and damage to her heart. Semyon Zolotaryov had similar chest injuries. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had a severe fracture to his skull. The force required to cause these injuries was compared by the medical examiner to being struck by a car. Yet none of the 3 showed any external wounds or bruising on their skin. Perhaps the most disturbing finding was that Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. According to the forensic report, these soft tissues had been removed, though the examiner could not conclusively determine whether this had occurred before or after death. Some investigators attributed the tissue loss to natural decomposition and scavenging by animals in the months before the body was recovered from the flowing water in the ravine. Others pointed to the selective nature of the damage as evidence of something more deliberate and sinister. The Soviet criminal investigation, designated case number 431, concluded in May 1959 with a determination that has baffled researchers ever since. According to the official closing statement signed by investigator Lev Ivanov, the cause of death for all 9 hikers was a compelling natural force which the hikers were not able to overcome. This vague and unusual phrasing answered nothing. It did not identify the force. It did not explain the injuries. It did not explain why the hikers fled their tent. The case was closed and the files were sealed for decades. The case file was eventually made public after the fall of the Soviet Union, and researchers began examining the evidence with fresh eyes. According to documents obtained by investigators, Lev Ivanov himself later admitted that the case was more complex than the official conclusion suggested. In a 1990 interview, Ivanov stated that he had been pressured by Soviet authorities to close the investigation quickly and that he personally believed there were aspects of the incident that defied conventional explanation. He mentioned unexplained orange-colored lights seen in the sky over the area around the time of the incident. The avalanche theory has been the most widely discussed natural explanation. According to this hypothesis, a small slab avalanche struck the tent during the night, burying the hikers partially and causing the crushing injuries found on some of the victims. The survivors, panicking in the darkness and unable to see, cut their way out of the tent and fled downhill. However, critics of this theory point out that the slope where the tent was pitched was not steep enough for an avalanche, no avalanche debris was found, and the tent was still mostly intact when discovered. In 2019, the Russian Federation Prosecutor General's office reopened the investigation using modern forensic techniques and analysis. According to their 2020 findings, the office concluded that the deaths were caused by a combination of avalanche and extreme weather conditions. They stated that a delayed-release slab avalanche, triggered by the hikers' own disruption of the snowpack, struck the tent and forced the group to flee. The crushing injuries were attributed to the weight of the snow slab. The hypothermia deaths were attributed to the extreme cold the hikers faced while inadequately dressed. In 2021, a team of researchers including Johann Gaume from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology published a study in the journal Communications Earth and Environment that provided the first scientifically rigorous support for the avalanche theory. According to their research, the specific topography and snow conditions at the site could produce a delayed slab avalanche hours after the hikers set up camp. Using computer simulations and crash test data, they demonstrated that the snow slab could produce the exact type of internal injuries found on the victims, crushing trauma without external wounds. Not everyone is convinced by the avalanche explanation. According to independent researchers and members of the Dyatlov Memorial Foundation, several aspects of the case remain unexplained by any avalanche scenario. Why did the hikers not retrieve their boots and clothing before fleeing? Why did they travel over a mile downhill rather than moving laterally out of the avalanche path? Why were some hikers found with clothing from others? And what explains the reported radioactive contamination found on some of the clothing, a detail mentioned in the original investigation files? The radioactivity finding has fueled some of the most dramatic theories about the incident. According to the original forensic report, clothing from two of the victims showed elevated levels of beta radiation. Some researchers have connected this to Soviet military testing, noting that the Ural region was used for nuclear weapons tests and rocket launches during the Cold War. The Teka River, located in the broader region, was contaminated by nuclear waste from the Mayak facility. However, the radioactivity levels found were modest, and some experts believe they have mundane explanations. The military theory proposes that the hikers inadvertently witnessed or were affected by a military test, and that the Soviet government subsequently covered up the true cause of their deaths. According to proponents of this theory, parachute mines, rocket debris, or weapons testing in the area could explain the unusual injuries, the reported lights in the sky, the radioactive contamination, and the Soviet government's haste to close the investigation. Several witnesses reported seeing bright orange orbs in the sky over the northern Urals in February 1959, though these could have various explanations. The indigenous Mansi people, who inhabited the region around the incident, were initially investigated as potential suspects. According to the case files, investigators questioned whether the Mansi might have attacked the hikers for trespassing on sacred lands. Kolat Sayakal held spiritual significance for the Mansi. However, this theory was quickly dismissed. The Mansi were cooperative with investigators, helped with the search, and there was no physical evidence of any confrontation between the hikers and local inhabitants. The Mansi were cleared of any involvement early in the investigation. A katabatic wind theory has gained attention in recent years as a possible explanation. According to meteorologists familiar with the Ural Mountain region, katabatic winds are sudden, violent downslope winds that can reach hurricane force with virtually no warning. These winds could have struck the tent with enough force to collapse it, creating a noise and impact that panicked the occupants into fleeing. Combined with the disorientation of darkness and extreme cold, the hikers may have been unable to find their way back to the tent, leading to their deaths from exposure. The infrasound theory proposes that a rare meteorological phenomenon called a Kármán vortex created low-frequency sound waves that induced panic and irrational behavior in the hikers. According to this hypothesis, wind passing over the mountain's dome-shaped peak could produce infrasound waves known to cause feelings of dread, disorientation, and panic in humans. If the hikers were subjected to sustained infrasound during the night, they may have been driven to flee their tent in a state of irrational terror, unable to think clearly about their survival needs. The personal backgrounds of the 9 hikers have been scrutinized for any detail that might explain the tragedy. According to university records and personal histories, the group included 2 women and 7 men, most of them engineering or physics students. Semyon Zolotaryov, at 37 the oldest member, was a World War II veteran and experienced mountaineer whose presence on the expedition was somewhat unusual. Some researchers have focused on Zolotaryov, speculating that his military background and age difference from the others may hold significance, though no concrete evidence supports this. The photographs recovered from the hikers' cameras have been analyzed exhaustively. According to the developed film, the images show the group setting up camp, skiing, and posing for photos in the days before the incident. The final photographs taken at the campsite on the evening of February 1 show the group setting up the tent in windy conditions. One controversial photograph, taken later that night and partially obscured, appears to show bright lights or figures in the darkness. The interpretation of this image has been debated for decades without resolution. The site of the tragedy, now officially named Dyatlov Pass after the group's leader, has become a destination for adventurous hikers and true crime enthusiasts. According to Russian tourism records, hundreds of people visit the remote mountain pass each year, despite its extreme isolation and harsh conditions. A memorial plaque stands near the campsite bearing the names and faces of the 9 hikers. The mountain that the Mansi called the Mountain of the Dead long before 1959 seems to have earned its name for a reason that extends far beyond indigenous legend. The families of the 9 hikers have spent over 60 years seeking answers. According to published interviews, relatives of the victims have expressed frustration with both the original Soviet investigation and the 2019 Russian reopening, which they feel did not adequately address all the evidence. Some families have pursued private investigations, hiring experts, and commissioning independent forensic analyses. The pain of losing a child, a sibling, or a friend under inexplicable circumstances and then being denied a definitive explanation for over 6 decades is a burden that defies comprehension. The Dyatlov Pass Incident remains classified by many researchers as one of the most mysterious events of the 20th century. According to historians of unexplained events, what makes the case so compelling is not any single anomaly but the accumulation of inexplicable details. The slashed tent, the barefoot flight into killing cold, the selective injuries, the missing soft tissue, the radioactive clothing, the reported lights in the sky, and the Soviet government's evasive conclusion all combine to create a puzzle with no fully satisfying solution. Every theory explains some facts but leaves others unresolved. Perhaps the truest thing that can be said about the Dyatlov Pass incident is that 9 young people, full of life and ambition, went into the mountains and never came back. According to their own diaries and photographs, they were brave, curious, and joyful. They loved the wilderness. They trusted each other. And on one terrible night in the frozen darkness of the Ural Mountains, something compelled them to run. What that something was, whether avalanche or wind or something we have not yet imagined, the Mountain of the Dead has never revealed. And after 66 years, it may never.